conversation that we have to get into, and it is with David Cobb. We got to talk about all the craziness that's going on in college football. So, David, the best place to start, I think, is instead of just picking between national college football and SEC media days, it's just the topic that is on everyone's mind, and that's realignment. First and foremost, we haven't had you on the show since the Big Ten, USC, UCLA news. How far out of left field did that feel to you, or have you reached the point to where anything's possible?
Well, it feels out of left field. I think that's a great way to put it when you think about the geography of the transition, because USC and UCLA make zero sense from a Big Ten geographical standpoint. And now you're talking about 3 time zones apart for those LA schools traveling out to the East Coast time zone schools that are in the Big Ten. That's preposterous. And so that is, to me, what was most stunning about these 2 schools in particular. It really wasn't that there was additional realignment, because it felt like after Texas and OU, there were always going to be more dominoes to fall. But just seeing the chasm open up within the Power 5 structure geographically like that, I think it's still kind of difficult to wrap your minds around. And I think that in particular is an issue that the coaches at USC and UCLA probably aren't thrilled about, because if you're talking about making multiple cross-country trips every season, that's pretty taxing. 5 and 6 hour flights multiple times a season from a football standpoint. And then from a basketball standpoint, that's far from ideal as well, if you're talking about doing that type of trip on a weeknight.
Yeah, and you talk about trips. I mean, just on the face of it, when you jump time zones like that, we've already talked about travel, but now is travel going to have to be moved up to where these teams and even teams on the Big Ten side, current members, might have to roll into town on Wednesday, Thursday now at the latest, just to get adjusted to time zones, because we see a lot of times when you jump 2-3 time zones like they're going to have to do, that the better team doesn't always win, because it does mess with the body.
Yeah, for sure. You're going to hear the term body clock now a lot more. It's already something that college football coaches had a little bit of a pet peeve on, which is, these scenarios in which when you do have to make a cross-country trip and the game starts at noon Eastern, but it's really like 9 a.m. according to the Pacific time, or vice versa. If you're an East Coast team, if you're Rutgers now, and the Big Ten schedules you to go play against UCLA in a game that kicks off at 7 Pacific, well, that's 10 p.m. on your quote-unquote body clock. So the coaches who are going to have to travel more as a part of this, I'm sure, are not thrilled. And then you also just think about from a competitive standpoint, if you're Lincoln Riley or Chip Kelly, let's go one at a time there. You're Chip Kelly. You finally made traction last year in the Pac-12. You got back to 8-4. You're looking ahead to building up to maybe 9 or 10 wins in the next season or two. Well, all of a sudden, when you go to the Big Ten, you might lose a lot of that momentum if you're at UCLA, and be happy to just go 6-6 in a league that tough. And for USC, the expectation under Lincoln Riley is that they're going to compete for and win national titles. Well, that was going to be easier for USC to accomplish in the Pac-12, because it's just not as difficult of a football league. Well, now all of a sudden you put them in the Big Ten, and they're going to have to play Michigan State and Penn State and Wisconsin and Iowa, and not to mention Ohio State on a regular basis. It's just the path to winning is more difficult, I think, for really everyone involved, but in particular for USC and UCLA. So I get it from a money standpoint. It's all about the money, and the finances are going to be great from that Big Ten media rights deal. But the wins and losses thing, that's kind of important to your fans, and that's going to be more difficult to make success when you're in the Big Ten now.
It definitely will. And, this move sent shockwaves, I think, maybe not as big as Texas and OU, especially, on this side of the country. Those are just two. I think if you polled most people would say OU and Texas are bigger brands than even 2 schools like USC and UCLA. So I don't think it's in as big of shockwaves, but big shockwaves through the college football landscape a few weeks ago. And it's kind of hard to feel bad for some of the other programs in the Pac-12 or in the Big Ten or in the Big 12, because we're starting to look like this super conference thing is going to be a possibility, and it's hard to feel bad for these programs because they're almost doing it to themselves, and more importantly, the commissioners of these leagues are doing it to themselves because Greg Sankey told him if you expand the playoff, it's better for you more than it is for me. He basically says, I'm getting mine in. You haven't. Why are you doing this to themselves? So when all the dust does settle and one of these leagues are probably going to be gone, doesn't it feel like they only had themselves to blame at this point?
Yeah, the college football playoff expansion bit is going to be huge in determining whether or not the remaining teams in the Pac-12 and the Big 12 still feel like big boys or not. Because if there is still access for an automatic qualifier out of the Pac-12 or an automatic qualifier out of the Big 12, as was discussed last spring, well, then they can survive and be okay, and their fan bases will be engaged because it's all about the glimmer of hope, for a fan base. And if there is still a path under a new college football playoff format in the coming years for those programs, then I think they'll manage to survive even without the massive financial payouts of the other leagues. But if the playoff becomes something incredibly exclusive where Kevin Warren and Greg Sankey kind of box everyone else out, well, you know what? Then those other teams and those other leagues are going to fade into oblivion. And you're right. I think in particular with the Pac-12, they really only have themselves to blame because if they didn't see the possibility or the likelihood of losing members at this point in time, well, they were just being ignorant or being blind. And instead of being proactive last year after the OU and Texas move, and going after some of the leftover Big 12 teams like Texas Tech and Oklahoma State and Baylor and TCU and some of the other decent brands left in the Big 12, the Pac-12 just sat on their laurels. And we were like, well, we don't want to go after somebody who's not a Tier 1 research institution. And we don't want to be affiliated with somebody who has a religious connotation to their school. And it's like, guys, what are we talking about? This is a sports conference. Nobody's going to make you collaborate on microbiology. It's a sports conference. And the Pac-12 was just too uppity, not pragmatic enough. And now they are in an incredibly vulnerable position because they were just ignorant to the reality at this time last year.
Hey, that is a great way to put it, David. Before we get to some storylines around SEC Media Days, where do you think all the dust settles? How big do these leagues get being reported to the SEC, at least for right now? And, right now can literally mean 12:45 on a Tuesday and not 12:45 on a Wednesday. But as of right now, the SEC says that they're going to stay at 16. But how far do you see these conferences going? Do you see them getting to 20? Do you see them 24? Heck, could they go to 30?
Yeah, eventually they're going to expand again. Eventually they will, I think, because part of the reason I think why the SEC has come out and indicated that it is likely to remain at 16 for now is just because of the difficulty of getting these ACC teams out of their grants of rights. So we know that ACC TV deal runs through 2036 and that there would be significant legal and financial repercussions for anyone who tried to get out of that and jump ship right now. And I think that's probably the reason why it feels like the SEC is going to stay put for now, is because from a brand addition, a value standpoint, geography, the Florida States, the Clemsons, the Virginia Techs, the Miamis of the world feel like North Carolina, there's some others, feel like they would be the best additions to the SEC, but does the SEC really want to try to deal with everything that would be involved with breaking up that ACC grant of rights? That I doubt the appetite is there for that. So I think ultimately you might see some of those ACC schools in other conferences in the future, but that grant of rights that they're in right now is going to keep them from jumping. And they're the most valuable brands that are left because the leftover Big 12 schools are not all that valuable. The leftover Pac-12 schools, kind of in the same boat. Oregon and Washington are good programs, but they're not total earth shakers. So the best value programs left out there are in the ACC. It's just going to be really hard for them to go anywhere for now.
We're talking with David Cobb from CBS Sports. You can follow him on Twitter at David W. Cobb. David, SEC Media Days is only 6 days away. What are some of the storylines that you're going to be really following along this coming week?
Well, it will be nice just to get back to the football discussion, right? Because these last, ever since the NCAA tournament ended, the discussion, anytime I'm on with you guys or somebody else, it naturally and rightfully so turns to the off-field dynamics that are changing in college sports and NIL and transferring and all this transformation and realignment that we're seeing. And that's part of it, and it's fun to a certain extent. But the reason we all love college sports is because of what happens on Saturdays. And, to get into talking season and breaking down rosters, looking ahead to storylines for the season ahead, that's going to be really refreshing next week. And so I think Greg Sankey's address will be huge because he's the head of the NCAA's transformation committee, and he's the most powerful man in college athletics, and we got to see what he's going to say next week, and that'll be significant. But shortly thereafter, when he steps away from the podium, the attention is going to turn to the 2022 football season, and it's going to be a good one. I mean, like the SEC West, it's going to be just as loaded and stacked and difficult as ever. And, we're going to start to get a chance to talk about some of that stuff and break some of that stuff down. And that's going to be really refreshing when we get to that point.
Well, David, last thing for you real quick, as we are kind of up against the break. If you were going to be in Atlanta, where would you rank the Hogs in the SEC West this year?
Yeah, I think they've got a shot at, being that second or third place team. It's pretty wide open after Alabama, in my opinion. Texas A&M, we keep thinking, are they finally going to break through? This is finally going to be the year. Well, we haven't really seen it. So until they do that, until they solidify themselves as a division title contender on a perennial basis, second place in my mind remains up for grabs behind Alabama. And so Arkansas is one of a handful of teams, but certainly talented enough. The culture piece, as we all know, is phenomenal. So with KJ Jefferson back, who I think is probably the third or fourth best quarterback in the conference, yeah, they're going to have a shot to finish second. And I'd have to break it down, but I would probably end up putting them third behind Texas A&M, but I think they at least have a shot to beat out Texas A&M for number 2 in the West.
Well, we'll leave it there, David. I appreciate you coming on with us and joining us. And next time we bring you on, we'll talk about things that are actually going to happen on the field. So make sure you brush up, because I will ask you about the third-string right tackle for Mississippi State next time, okay?
Partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's Wimbledon Finals, Major League Baseball, the latest fighting news, and even next season's early NFL futures. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code BLEAV. That's BLEAV to get the bonus and get into the action. Bet online, where the game starts.